Hi guys, so this is part 2 of my series on the Astro theological resurrection. So I just got something to read to you from a brief history of thought, a philosophical guide to living. And this is talking about the word cosmos, or the world that was supposed to pass away at the second coming of Christ. So he starts talking about this cosmic order. To find one's place in the world, to live and act, we must first obtain knowledge of the world in which we find ourselves. This is the first task of philosophical theory, and philosophy just means the love of wisdom. So it is in the Bible, and Paul actually uses a lot of Seneca and Philo's philosophy in the Bible. So what is intrinsic about the world? What is most real, most important? Now, in the tradition of Stoicism, the innermost essence of the world is harmony, order, both true and beautiful, which the Greeks referred to by the term cosmos. This was coined by Pythagoras in about 500 BC. If we want to form a simple idea of what was meant by cosmos, we must imagine the whole of the universe as if it were both ordered and animate. For the Stoics, the structure of the world, the cosmic order, is not merely magnificent, it is also comparable to a living being. The material world, the entire universe, fundamentally resembles a gigantic animal, of which each element, each organ is conceived and adapted to the harmonious functioning of the whole. Each part, each member of this immense body is perfectly in place and functions impeccably. Although disasters do occur, they do not last for long, and order is soon restored. In the most literal sense, without fault and in harmony with other parts. And it is this that theoria helps us to unravel and understand. In English, the term cosmos has resulted in, among other words, cosmetic. Originally, the science of the body, beautiful, related to the justness of proportions, to the art of makeup, which sets off which is well made, and if necessary conceals that which is less so. It is this order, or cosmos, that is ordained structure of the universe in its entirety that the Greeks named divine, theon, and not, as the Jews and Christians, a being apart from or external to the universe, existing prior to and responsible for the act of its creation. It is this divinity, therefore, nothing to do with a personal Godhead, inextricably caught up with the natural order of things, that the Stoics invite us to contemplate theorein, for example, but the study of sciences such as physics, astronomy, or biology, which show the universe in its entirety to be well made, from the regular movement of the planets down to the tiniest organisms. We can therefore say that the structure of the universe is not merely divine and perfect of itself, but also rational, consonant with what the Greeks termed the logos, from which we derive logic and logical, which exactly describes the admirable order of things, which is why our human reason is capable of understanding and fathoming reality. Through the exercise of theoria, as a biologist comes to comprehend the functions of the organisms of a living creature he dissects. For Stoics, opening one's eyes to the world was akin to the biologist examining the body of a mouse or a rabbit to find that everything therein is perfectly well made. So, this is a little bit of the philosophical thought that some people have called Jesus a Stoic. I know that Joseph Atwill calls Christianity basically a universalizing of Stoicism. I think it's been proven that Plato's teaching was in the New Testament, And so here we, so this was basically the Stoic thought. Now, we've already taken into account, so there's this creator at the beginning of Genesis. We've already taken into account that they would learn about the universe, the cosmos, the world. Now, I'm not saying that there is no external being like the Stoics believed exactly, but I am looking at how they were interpreting what is the invisible being, because they were looking at the natural universe, which Paul does. He says God has made it plain to them, and he's talking about looking at the world around you in Romans 1. So what I just want to talk about covenant creation, because the covenant creation shows us how Genesis isn't to be taken as this literal creating of the physical universe out of from this invisible Godhead, but it is the creation itself, and it's explaining a cycle of the creation. So I'll actually just talk about this chapter from Jason DaCosta's book on the Genesis of Israel, and he wasn't Israel only at this point, but I think one of his studies shows perfectly that for preterists that Genesis isn't to be taken literally. So he says here, preterists are quick to dismiss any alternate views of Genesis creation. In fact, 9 out of 10 of them will quickly label you confused and lost if you even so much as suggest that Genesis isn't speaking of the creation of material earth and the creation of the first biological man. They usually appear to the argument that sounds like this. When one takes the plain and literal meaning of the words, you cannot understand Genesis any other way than literal material creation. But what is strange is that these same literalists in Genesis use a totally different approach when they get to the other end of the Bible. If we were consistent with that interpretation method, I recently highlighted, none of us would be preterists. We would most likely be futurists who believe in a bodily, visible future second coming of Christ. We would most likely believe in a literal destruction of the literal cosmos and a literal creation of a totally new heaven and a totally new globe in our future. And we just talked about how the cosmos to the Stoics was the literal cosmos. But the destruction of it was actually the destruction of an age. So the literal creation of a totally new heaven and a totally new globe in our future. We would believe in a future caught up type rapture. We would believe in a literal physical bodies popping up out of dirt in a future resurrection, and so on. Right, so Jason's point was that since preterists, they read heaven and earth will pass away within this generation. It says that in Matthew 24 and 23, Matthew 16, right? You just go to the preterists and you find all the 400 time statements in the New Testament about when that cosmos would pass away and the new cosmos would begin, or that would be the end of the aeon, or the age. So why don't they take... So that was the first cosmos, which was metaphorical. They say it was about the covenant. Well, I'm telling you, it's actually about the zodiac. It's about a part of the zodiac that would represent the lower, or the old cosmos, the old covenant, and that was passing away to to bring in the new cosmos, or the new covenant. And that has been literalized by futurists, and preterists have basically taken it as metaphors for this legalistic sort of increase and decrease, which doesn't make much sense in the human level. And well, although they do provide the most coherent sort of literal interpretation, before moving on to sort of the mythological views. So my suggestion is let's look at Genesis again, and let's look at another cycle in the Bible, and let's keep looking at those, and then we'll start to see how, like, all mythologies, they have this big destruction of the earth and all things, and then everything is sort of reborn or made new, or there's a new creation. And that was to do with the end of one age of the great year and the beginning of another age of the great year, which is 25,920 years. And preterists like to say, well, there's the end of one age and the beginning of another age, and that's it. Well, in Ephesians, Paul talks about the plural ages to come. And he talks about the plural ages in the past, I think, in Corinthians. So we can't just, it's not right to say that there's no end of this coming age. But there is the overarching great year age, which has the ages within it. So that's sort of how that's been interpreted, I believe. And so for the next part, let's get into how the Bible is actually, the characters in the Bible are actually gods. And this needs to be made clear because, well, it's pretty obvious once you start reading the mythologies. Like, I would recommend actually do yourself a favor, listen to the Mahabharata, which is 6 times longer than the Bible, and it comes 2,000 years before the Bible, and it's this Indian text, and you can see the parallels, and you can actually understand the Bible better through listening to these mythologies. And so the next part is about these are gods. So in John 10:34, Jesus says, does it not say in your law, have I not said in your law that ye are gods? Right? And he's quoting Psalm 78. Now, so Jesus is calling those gods to whomever the word of God came. So this is the Logos, which had many meanings, but it's whoever the logic, whoever the reasonability came of God, they became gods. So this is talking about this cycle where the word of God written in heaven comes down and it comes to Israel and they became gods. So you die so that you can live, as Jesus says. And the word is a sword, right? The word is sharp and active, two-edged sword, like my group. And so there was this dying and rising motif, and it would be a rising again of the dead, right? It says there's a rising again, so that means there was going to rise back to what they were before, and it would be rising up, and the fall would be down. And so we have all the language that fits the path of the sun on the ecliptic. And so as Cicero says, that which reasons is superior to that which does not. Nothing is superior to the world. The world therefore reasons. So this is the cosmos. By the same rule, the world may be proved to be wise, happy, and eternal. For the possession of all these qualities is superior to the want of them. Right? So what he's saying is that because we came from the world, Mother Earth, so to speak, we can observe the world around us, but they really gave birth to us, and therefore the world must have reasonability, just like we have. And consciousness is something that science hasn't actually been able to explain, even in the modern age. And they're actually doing tests that show that consciousness precedes space and time. So I have a video about that on my channel. And there's the argument that your memories are stored outside of your brain. So consciousness, again, the Stoics may not be right about everything is this physical world. Or maybe he's interpreting that from somewhere, I don't know. But the point here is that these ancient Stoics basically saw these stars as gods, and you can find Cicero saying that Hercules, by living virtuously, ascended and became a god or a star. So where do we get, where did Jesus quote? Well, this was probably taken from Psalms 78, which was about, so there's this argument that futurists make that, or people who are taking the Bible literally, that say that in that same chapter it says, but you will die like a man. Well, that's because the stars, they come down the zodiac and they put on the flesh and they die like a man at the winter solstice. So there's the kingdom of light, and you descend into the kingdom of darkness, putting on the flesh, and you die like a man. So this is exactly what Jesus did. And so this was the sun myth, where the sun would come on the winter solstice, and for 3 days the sun would stand still. And that's what solstice means, at the winter solstice. So the solstice, if the sun is standing still, well, to these ancients, as Cicero says, if it's moving, it must have intelligence, because something must have caused it to move. Well, if the sun is standing still, it means it's dying. So it appears to stand still for 3 days, appears to die for 3 days at the lowest point on the ecliptic before it rises again. And then, of course, it's going to come on the clouds and pray not in winter. So there's a lot of clues about that this is actually a mythology, I believe, and that it's about the stars. So the next point I want to make is basically the Eden, because we want to get into this creation, understand Genesis. So Eden, let's go, I'll just switch screen here and show you Ezekiel. So we can turn to Ezekiel. So this is Ezekiel. He says in Ezekiel 28, to destruction they bring down thee, thou diest by the deaths of the wounded in the heart of the seas. Right, so the bottom of the zodiac is the seas, which in Revelation 17:15 represents peoples, nations, languages. The knees are associated with the winter solstice on at least that area. In terms of the chakras, thou diest by the deaths of the wounded. But in verse 13, he said he was, verse 9, he said, I am a God before him who is slaying thee. So God is godliness, is the image of God before the fall. So he was basically, this is a term for authority. We think of it as like this invisible being that's not in this world, but this is really a term for authority. I believe it's talking about the stars or constellations before they go down behind the horizon. He says, Son of man, lift up a lamentation for the king of Tyre. So the king is up on top of the zodiac in the kingdom of light in summer. And thou hast said to him, thus said the Lord Jehovah, thou art sealing up a measurement full of wisdom, perfect in beauty. Right? Wisdom and beauty are summer qualities. In Eden, the garden of God, thou hast been. Every precious stone thy covering, ruby, topaz, diamond, beryl, onyx, jasper, sapphire, emerald, workmen of thy tabrets. So there's 12 precious stones, just like in Revelation, which could be the stars that they were looking at. And so then Eden becomes this place of the heavens, or the starry host. Thou art the anointed cherub who is covering, and I've set thee in the holy mount. God has been in the midst of the stones of fire, and now it says walked up and down. So you're going up and down motions in Eden, and up is first and down is second. Perfect are thou in thy ways from the day of thy being produced, till perversity hath been found in thee. So a birth was in Aries, because you're born out of the winter months, because those are the birth pangs of Virgo. By the abundance of thy merchandise thou has filled thy midst with violence. Thou dost sin, and I thrust thee from the mount of God. Right, so this is like Mount Olympus was the top half of the zodiac, Hercules and his 12 labors. Right, in the Bible there's always 2 cities and 2 mountains. And you can see that in Galatians chapter 4. He says, I destroy thee, O cherub, or angel, or angle, or this was an aspect of the signs of the zodiac, from the midst of the stones of fire. High hath been thy heart because of thy beauty. Thou hast corrupted thy wisdom. On the earth I have cast thee. So Eden is not on earth. Right? That's really important to remember. Verse 13 says, in Eden. And then what did he do? He cast thee before kings to look on thee. So it was in Eden, and then it was cast to the earth. So Eden is not the earth, and it's not below the earth, but it's above the earth. It's a place of righteousness with God, which is the top of the zodiac. From the abundance of thy iniquity, by the perversity of thy traffic, thou hast polluted thy sanctuaries, right? So the top of the zodiac has to do with pride, because you're puffed up, as when summer solstice, because at that point the kingdom is going to start falling again. I make thee become ashes on the earth, before the eyes of all beholding thee. So then you can see here how this is all talking about the heavens, because he was cast down. You can see this language in Lamentations as well, just before Ezekiel. He says, the Lord cloud in his anger, the daughter, how doth the Lord cloud? This is English, Young's literal translation. I'll just switch. How the Lord in his anger has set the daughter of Zion under a cloud. He has cast down from heaven to earth the splendor of Israel. He has not remembered his footstool in the day of his anger. So it's being cast down. You got the footstool, which is in the southern hemisphere. You have the footstool constellation. And straight up in the north hemisphere right now, you can see the throne constellation, which is Cassiopeia. Lord has swallowed up without mercy all the habitations of Jacob. He has broken down the strongholds of his daughter of Judah. He has brought down the ground in dishonor, the kingdom and its rulers. Sweet. So you see this in the Exodus theme. Let's go Joshua 5:9. Right, so the Israelites, let me just pull up paint here for a minute. I was researching that, but okay, let's say that Okay, this is what we're going to call Egypt. And the Israelites were here for a long time, for 430 years. And then Moses came, and they were able to get out of Egypt. And they went through the sea. And then they were in the wilderness for 40 years. Just like the 40 days from Passover to Pentecost. Or it's also 40 is, the 4 is fulfilled in the 7th feast. So it's also the top half of the zodiac, which is creation, which is parallel to the first day of Genesis. And then they enter the promised land. Right. So you go from slavery and you go around the zodiac twice and you enter the freedom. So in the great year there was 2 cycles of the zodiac that would be thought to be in the great year, because it's always split in half. And they've done all the numerology, which is basically the same as the mathematics to the Greeks. So what do we find when they enter into the promised land, right? Or the covenant of rest, which is nighttime is rest. And this is parallel to the sea, Red Sea, where all flesh dies as they come out of Egypt. The Israelites come out of Egypt in Exodus because the sea is the place of nighttime, which is sleep. And this is where people die in winter. So what happens in Joshua 5:9? Right, they've entered the promised land at this point. And the Lord said to Joshua, "Today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you." And so the name of that place is called Gilgal to this day. So why did the reproach of Egypt not leave 40 years before? Well, this is the Exodus theme in some of these mythological religions. They would call Egypt the lower half of the zodiac, and you would be set free from Egypt with going into the upper half, or the promised land, which is flowing with milk and honey, which has to do with the Milky Way, I believe. There was this god Bat, which is a cow god who produced the Milky Way, and the honey is probably the beehive cluster in Cancer. And that's also to do with another study, which is about Samson and Delilah. So they entered the promised land, and it looks like they were entering rest from their labors. So they had become a new creation at this point, because they were completing this cycle of the great year. And again, they're called the bride because the bride is the wife of the lamb, and the lamb is Rama or Aries, and it was associated with women. The woman is the nighttime, or the bottom half of the zodiac. The lamb begins the second half in Revelation 21. It says it's the wife of the lamb. Well, the bottom of the zodiac is to do with women because the moon comes out at night, and the moon is connected to the menstrual cycle of the female. So then the moon has a feminine. Then the word night is actually a feminine word in the Greek language. So now we get into this cycle of the city of refuge, and I think next time I'll probably get into where the sun stood still. There was another cycle there, and after that I might do Samson and Delilah. There's another cycle there. So Numbers 35, 9 to 34. This was actually when I was in this Korean group that we had this study, and they actually were teaching that we humans sinned in heaven and we incarnated in the flesh, and that's because it's all based on these cycles. So that's where they get it from. They've just twisted it. So cities of refuge. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the people of Israel and say to them, when you cross the Jordan into the land of Canaan, then you shall select to be cities of refuge for you, that the manslayer who kills any person without intent may flee there. The cities shall be for you a refuge from the avenger," right? It's the Lord's to avenge. "That the manslayer may not die until he stands before the congregation for judgment. And the cities that you shall be your 6 cities of refuge, you shall give 3 cities beyond the Jordan, and 3 cities in the land of Canaan to be cities of refuge. These 6 cities shall be for the refuge for the people of Israel, and for the stranger, and for the sojourner among them. That anyone who kills any person without intent may flee there. But if he struck him down with an iron object so that he died, he is a murderer. The murderer shall be put to death. If he struck him down with a stone tool that could cause death, and he died, he is a murderer. The murderer shall be put to death. Or if he struck him down with a wooden tool that could cause death, and he died, he is a murderer. The murderer shall be put to death. The avenger of blood shall himself put the murderer to death. When he meets him, he shall put him to death. And if he punished him out of hatred, or hurled something at him, lying in wait, so that he died, or in enmity struck him with his hand, so that he died, then he who struck the blow shall be put to death. He is a murderer. The avenger of blood shall put the murderer to death when he meets him." So basically what he's saying is the avenger of blood would go out to these, there would be these cities of refuge, that any person who was pure in heart or consciousness, you see this term consciousness throughout the New Testament about Jesus, the blood of Christ will cleanse your conscience. And this has to do with the day cycle, I believe, because life is in the blood, and the day has to do with life. And this was the new covenant. Passover was a cup of wine, which represented the blood of the lamb. And again, as we saw, the lamb represents the upper half of the zodiac. If he struck him down with an iron object, right, he is a murderer. Okay. So and the murderers are all put to death. So there's all these different elements of the lower half of the zodiac that seem to be connected to the murdering and the sins, right? And the avenger of blood is, I believe, basically the morning sun. because it exposes what's in darkness. He must remain in the city until the death of the high priest. So there's 3 on one side and 3 on the other. So I believe you could split. This could be talking about the Milky Way, which goes on the zodiac from Taurus and Gemini down through, if you drew a full circle here, this would be Sagittarius and Gemini, and this would be the Milky Way. So this is the Milky Way, and this is the Reed Sea, which looks like reeds. I believe this is where Moses is put in a basket. And so what we have here is on either side you have 3 cities. That he may return to dwell in the land before the death of the high priest. You shall not pollute the land in which you live, for blood pollutes the land. And no atonement can be made for the land for the blood that is shed in it, except by the blood of the one who shed it. You shall not defile the land in which you live, in the midst of which I dwell, for I, the Lord, dwell in the midst of the people of Israel. So let's pull out a study here. I'll show you a picture. So this is basically the picture we would draw to show how there is this, in the Old Testament you have the old home and the old city of refuge, and you would wait for the high priest to come and die, and in this way you could return to the city of or you could return home after the death of the high priest, right? So who is the high priest? Let's go to Daniel chapter 9 and verse 24. "70 weeks are decreed about your people and your holy city, to finish the transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for iniquity, to anoint the most holy place." So this was the most holy place would be anointed. So when is the most holy place anointed? Let's go Hebrews chapter 5 and verse 8. "Although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered, and being made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation to all who obey him, being designated by God a high priest after the order of Melchizedek." So he's the high priest. So what's the reality of the homeland that they're returning to? Right, we have to be careful not to say we. This is just a story depicting philosophical theory, right? This is mythology. Hebrews 11:14. "For people who speak thus make it clear that they are seeking a homeland." So this is talking about Abraham, all the fathers of faith. And faith was voted a virtue in the writings of Cicero, 45 BC. This was a god which was faith. Spiritually, this earth is the city of refuge, and we are sinners because we have put on the flesh. So how did they return to their heavenly country? 1 Peter 1:18, it was through the blood of Christ. And it was the blood of not just Christ, but the blood of the Lamb. 1 Peter 1:18, knowing that you are ransomed from the futile ways inherited from your forefathers, not with perishable things such as silver or gold. So this is silver is the moon, gold is the sun, but with the precious blood of Christ, like that of a lamb without blemish or spot. So Virgo is the pure sign of the Virgin, who is in its womb is the two fish, and it gives birth to the Lamb without blemish or spot. And the precious blood of Christ, or the Savior. In Egypt, the sun was called the risen Savior. And this was the wine of the grape harvest, which is right after Virgo, and is opposite of the Lamb. So instead of just drawing the heaven and earth, we can draw the actual sky and the actual earth on the zodiac, and we'd understand this much better. And the order of Melchizedek, guess what, is to offer bread and wine. So let me see if I can pull up a picture of the zodiac. Or just a minute. This, back in Genesis, we have Genesis 14. Abraham rescues Lot. After his return from the defeat of Chedorlaomer and the kings who were with him, the king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Shava. Okay, so valleys we know were in the winter months. That is the King's Valley. And Melchizedek, right, or maybe is Molech, king of Salem, the peace, brought out bread and wine. So he was priest of God Most High. So the bread is in the left hand of the Virgo constellation, which is usually the body. We have 5 senses, so there's 5 loaves of bread. And the wine is the bread that's you break the bread, right? And you have the wine. And this is the body of Christ. Jesus constantly says, I am the bread. So the bread that came down from heaven in the Exodus story, which was the wilderness. And this is the 40 days of waiting before you can have the wheat harvest, before they sprout, and the wheat harvest is in Gemini. And he blessed him, saying, Blessed be Abraham by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. So this concept of heaven and earth, again, which is passing away in the New Testament. So we know it passed away in the New Testament through preterism. This is not a literal heaven and earth that Melchizedek or Abraham possessed. So Abraham is Abba, father, Ram. So we have Ram is the Lamb constellation. Is also associated with Saturn. The father Ram is the Saturn, who is the Lord of the universe, or he's the highest heaven in the Aristotle's spheres. And so Jesus brings out bread and wine. So that's all agricultural, and it's therefore on the zodiac as well in the constellations. You have the grape harvest in Libra and the bread in Virgo. So this is the kings of Sodom is going down to meet him in the valley. So that's exactly where it would be. And especially if you count for the procession, of course, this would be more in the summer with procession. Depending on how far back you go, one age of procession is 2,000 years. But they're going down to the valley, and they're bringing out bread and wine, and Jesus is crucified at the winter solstice, and out of his body comes the blood and the water. So his bread is broken, producing the blood and the wine. And that's why in 1 John it says, you have the three that are witnesses. Everything that moves is either put in motion by natural impulse or by some external force, or of its own accord, and that the sun and moon and all the stars move, but that those things which are moved by natural impulse are either borne downward by their weight or upward by their lightness. Neither of which these things could be the case with the stars, because they move in a regular circle and orbit. Nor can it be said that there is some superior force which causes the stars to move in a manner contrary to nature. For what superior force can there be? It follows therefore that their motion must be voluntary. And whoever is convinced of this must discover not only of great ignorance, but great impiety likewise, if he denies the existence of the gods. Nor is their difference great whether a man denies their existence or deprives them of all design and action, for whatever is wholly inactive seems to me not to exist at all. Their existence therefore appears so plain that I can scarcely think that man in his senses who denies it. So if this was the kind of thinking they had, then you can see where this resurrection language comes in Daniel 12. When it talks about the hope of Israel. And again, the hope of Israel was Paul's hope. Paul in the book of Acts 24 and 25 says he has this no other hope than the hope of Israel, the old covenant, and that was his same hope. And in Daniel 12 we find the resurrection language for the New Testament and when it would be. Those who sleep, right? So you have the day cycle. This isn't literal death. This isn't literal resurrection. That's your first clue, is sleep. Those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. And those who are wise shall shine how? Like the brightness of the sky above. And those who turn many to righteousness like the what? Stars forever and ever. So they believed, they were obviously somewhat stoic. And the Bible is obviously teaching this. So this is the host of heaven. So Abraham's children would be like the stars forever and ever. This is the promise to Abraham. And they are literally stars, it could be said, and it might not even have anything to do with this spiritual realm, because the word spirit just means wind, and intellect, because you can see in the wind, and it's to do with the senses that you have in the wind. So they thought of these things interconnectedly. So when did this resurrection take place? Verse 7. I swear by him who lives forever that it would be for a time, times, and half a time, and that when the shattering of the power of the holy people comes to an end, all these things would be finished. So the time, times, half a time is actually for another video, but the shattering of the power of the holy people is undeniably the old covenant Israel, which I believe was the bottom half of the zodiac. And when they were destroyed, this would be finish all these things which he's been listing. Right? You look at the grammar here, it's all continuous language. There's a resurrection would be when Israel, the holy people, comes to an end. Their power comes to an end. And the New Testament is clear what that power is. It's the power of the law, which kills, power of the letter. So the Bible, again, that's because we're not supposed to take it literally, maybe like they were. We're supposed to take it in the sense of the spirit of what it's saying. I believe Jesus is actually a hypocrite if you take it literally. A lot of his language, right, is to be taken spiritually. And he did not say anything without using a parable. And that's in Matthew 13, it says that. So for next time, we'll get into a few more different cycles. And I'll probably have some more quotes. And I'll actually get into showing you some of these constellations in Genesis. David Matheson has some pretty cool stuff. So yeah, thanks for watching.